This entitled dad yells at a woman because her dog barked at his daughter, but wait until you find out the reason the dog was barking in the first place. Happy birthday, today's your birthday and on with the revamped show. So this happened just earlier today, and sadly, I was unable to bear witness to it, but my little sister was gracious enough to tell me the story in great detail. So my sister had just gotten done with swim practice, and in our small town, the civic center where our swim team practices is right next to a playground. So my sister goes over to entertain herself on the playground while she waits for my mum to pick her up. She sees a woman walk up towards the playground with two young kids, around her age she thinks. So somewhere in the 6 to 10 range. The mum, who obviously we shall call Karen, is also carrying a couple bags of McDonald's food. She goes to sit down at the picnic table by the playground. The three of them begin to eat their burgers. The kids then take their burgers in a bag and climb on the playground with them. But I don't mean they're climbing up the stairs or ladders or anything like that. See, this particular playground is one of those that has the little plastic roofs over top on the platform. And these kids decided to climb on top of the roofs. They then proceeded to eat their burgers and throw the wrappers on the ground. That's when a city worker, likely someone hired by a small town to maintain the park, comes over and sees these kids dangerously sitting on the little plastic roofs of the playground and blatantly littering. The worker approaches Karen and her children, and the exchange goes something like this. "Hey, kids, it's not safe up there. Could you please get down? And please pick up your garbage."
"Don't talk to my kids like that. You're not their parent. They're fine up there. I'm watching them."
"Ma'am, it's unsafe for them to be up there. It's a liability issue, and I don't want them getting hurt. Also, you can't be littering."
"Don't tell me how to keep my kids safe. Why don't you do your job and pick up all of this trash, and I'll do my job and take care of my kids."
"Well, ma'am, I watched you and your kids throw all of this trash down. This is your garbage."
"But it's your job to pick it up, so get to it."
At this, she throws another wrapper down. The argument continues something like that for a while. All the while, Karen is getting angrier and continues to escalate. By the end of it, Karen is screaming at this poor worker until finally she slaps him across the face. He walks away while Karen sits her happy little butt back down on the table and goes back to eating her quarter pounders. My sister can see the man pull out his phone and call the police. Within minutes, a cop arrives at the park and asks what's going on. The conversation between Karen and the cop goes about the same as it did with the worker, Karen insisting she is innocent, calling the worker a lazy piece of crap for not picking up her trash, insisting her precious little angels, who by now had climbed down and were eating at the picnic table, did nothing wrong.
"They were just playing, officer. I was watching them.
And
I'm the parent. I know what's safe for my children.
And
what's the point of hiring someone to clean the park if he's just gonna come tell me to clean up the mess?"
were commonly repeated phrases throughout her tirade. As her diatribe continues, she yet again began to escalate until she was screaming again. The officer was attempting to calm her down, but she wasn't having any of it. My sister is just standing off to the side of the playground by this point, watching in awe. Then, just like the city worker, Karen slaps the officer across the face as well. While the cop is stunned at the sudden hit, Karen screams at her kids, telling them to
"Get into the car!"
She jumps into her car parked nearby and tears off around the road that leads through the park and off into the distance. The cop quickly jumped into his car and followed close behind, sirens blaring. Now, I know for a fact that unless Karen has some Vin Diesel level tricks up her sleeves, she was not getting away from that cop. My town calls itself a city, but it's incredibly small. My high school graduating class was 70 people, if that's any indication. There isn't enough town for her to try and hide in, so he had to have caught her. Unfortunately, I didn't get to hear about any of that, as my sister, being a literal child, was unable to follow them. Hopefully we get some hot gossip about it in the next newspaper, or from some friends in town. I have no idea who this woman was, but the degrees of separation in this town are pretty small, so I will almost definitely hear something about it from someone. You know, that's really just next top tier class to be eating your fast food in a park bark and then just trashing the place, assuming, well, we hire a worker to clean up, so it's not like we've done anything wrong by littering. They're probably the kind of people that are like, oh yeah, well, we're just creating employment because, they wouldn't have a job otherwise. So this story is pretty mild compared to some other stories here, but it always irritates me to no end when people don't think animals deserve any respect. This happened about a month ago. Me, my dad, my sisters, and some extended family are spending the midsummer weekend at our summer cottage, and as a last treat before we all go our separate ways, my dad and uncle decide to take us to a famous cafe for coffee and ice cream. We're all adults, by the way, but hey, free ice cream. The place has a terrace, so I took my 2 dogs with me. The place is crowded and I stay outside with the dogs as the rest of the family goes in to get the coffee and ice cream. I have the dogs on a tight leash and we actually stay outside the terrace to avoid the crowds. The dogs are pretty chill, keeping a close eye on the door of the cafe because my dad is their 3rd favorite person in the world and he is in there. I see a kid, EK, climb over the fence of the terrace to the grass area where me and the dogs are waiting. Her dad, ED, is on his phone while rocking a stroller with a sleeping baby. I pay the EK no mind, assuming she'll just mind her own business. But then she runs by us, quite close, giggling. She runs by us again and she's looking at the dogs, so I assume she wants to pet them or play with them. My younger dog doesn't pay attention to her as he is too focused on keeping an eye on the cafe door, but my older dog, OD, tenses and starts growling a bit. She weighs 8 kilos, about 16 pounds, so I consider picking her up and then holding the younger dog's leash would become pretty awkward, so I bend down, put my hands on OD's back and get her attention by a couple of treats. The EK runs by us again. I tell her, hey, you're scaring the dogs. If you slow down and get low like this, you can come pet them. They are friendly, but they don't know you are playing. The kid just laughs and keeps running, now circling us. I decide, okay, I'm picking OD up, but she's decided she's had enough, jumps against the leash and barks at the EK. Now, obviously, OD couldn't get anywhere close to EK as I had her in a really tight leash, but the EK screams and runs to her dad. Oh boy.
Did your dog bite my child?
No, I have an eyewitness, plus there is obviously no mark on the child.
Then why is she crying?
She got scared when my dog barked at her. She was scaring the older dog by running too close and my dog got irritated. I did warn her.
You should train them better.
I know they can get agitated in certain situations, which is why I don't let them roam free or even on a loose leash. My dog is allowed to express that she is scared. It's my responsibility to make sure that she doesn't bite anyone by keeping an eye on her. Like you should be keeping an eye on your child so she doesn't scare dogs.
I have 2 children to keep an eye on. I can't always have my eyes on both of them.
If you can't keep your attention on a child that literally climbed over a fence so she could pet my dogs, then maybe teach your child how to ask if she can pet dogs without scaring them.
Dogs like yours should be put down if they can't behave.
I'm starting to lose my patience at this point, but I have worked in customer service for a really long time, so I'm trained in keeping my emotions at check. My dog would have no interest in your child if she had stopped running. She'd probably be on her back, happily being pet right now, if your child had just asked if she can pet my dogs instead of running around us, even though I warned her. Odie actually loves kids if they know how to behave. At this point, my family comes with the ice creams and coffees. They had seen what happened from the cafe window and jumped to my defense. A couple of strangers also start to defend me, saying that both the dogs had been model citizens until EK started annoying them, and that I had been keeping a better eye on my dogs than he his children. Finally, the EK's mum emerges from the cafe and starts lecturing both her husband and daughter and apologizes to me. She had seen the situation from the window also, and had even bought the dogs a couple of dog-friendly biscuits that the cafe offered and promised me she'd educate EK about how to approach dogs. The dad still tried to defend his reaction, but the mum was having none of it, and she was pretty ticked that he allowed EK to climb over the fence. She could have run off. I didn't point out that maybe she should have given up her place in the queue to come out a bit sooner, as I'm just happy to have her on my side. We get a table in the corner, and the dogs happily munch on their biscuits with no further incident. You know what's really sad is that the pet owner cared a lot more about watching their their pets than this dad did about watching his children. Like they said, what if the child was running away or something terrible had happened to them? If you want your kids to run around freely, well then you better instruct them on how to behave themselves in public. It's as simple as that. So a while ago, my basement had flooded. As a result of my work area being completely devastated, I was forced to move my 3D printing setup into another room due to the fact my work area was moldy and stuff. So for a while I had cleaned up everything, but since the area was still pretty much devastated, I did most of my 3D printing on top of carpet since my desk needed to be moved and I wasn't strong enough to move it myself. So months go by. My dad comes downstairs and flips out beyond belief. He tells me he doesn't want me to 3D print anything anymore due to the fact that the carpets are very flammable surface and 3D printers have heated components. Eventually, after a few days, we had come to a mutual agreement. I was to build an industrial 3D printer enclosure that my dad will pay for, and I'll do all my 3D printing in there from here on out, so we don't have this discussion again. While building this enclosure, me and my father had a lot of disagreements. First of all, he wants the enclosure vented. If my research is correct, there is no need to vent the 3D printer. My dad's concerns was that there are VOC gases emitted from 3D printing. VOC are gases that are rather deadly to breathe in. Yes, there are VOC gases emitted from 3D printing, but those gases are so minimal that the most my 3D printer will produce is significantly less than what is considered extremely low danger. What is considered low concern is approximately 0.3 meters cubed VOC. What 3D printers tend to produce is exactly that for the maximum for the materials I print with. Another disagreement we had is he wanted the venting for the 3D printer to be completely all metal. He wants me to CNC mill out of aluminium a ducting system. I don't know how to CNC mill, and that is way too extreme in my opinion. Let's assume worst case scenario. The 3D printer bursts into flames one day. First of all, 95% of the 3D printer is solid metal. The flames would have to be over 8 inches tall for it to remotely combust the venting system. Do you even know how hard that would be to have happen? You would have to cover the thing in fuel and watch it burn for anything like that to happen. So we ended up going with a computer server for the enclosure. The 3D printer filament would be mounted externally to reduce the chances of a fire. The server enclosure is this 80-pound box that is literally solid metal. So since it was taking my dad a very long time for us to come to a mutual agreement on what to do next, I needed to do some 3D printing. Since you can 3D print parts for face shields and masks for first responders, I decided to do a bunch of 3D printing for them. The first problem I ran into with them was that I was 3D printing on top of a wet towel. The surface was super wet I was printing on, since the only way I could 3D print anything, thanks to my parents, is on top of a stone slate. I forgot about that convo, and the only reason I remembered it is because of a lecture from my mother on this, so that is when I remembered to print on a stone slate. Unfortunately, I had been printing for 2 weeks without a stone slate, so my parents gave me a warning not to do that again. Then the table I was printing on was covered in about 1/3 inch of water. I tried wiping off the water but gave up since rubbing the table in a towel was not working. So I put the slate on top of the water and was like, okay, this is working because the water was not going over the slate. So I put the 3D printer on the slate and began printing. Unfortunately, the power cable for the 3D printer was in about 1/2 inch of water at one part of it. The part that was covered in water was part of the insulation. I didn't worry about it since the insulation was 1/4 inch thick and it would have been pretty hard for the insulation to fail on me. On top of that, the 3D printer could have easily have gotten wet. If the 3D printer had moved at all, or if the slate moved, it would have gotten soaked. So my mother came over and lectured me. She told me to roll over the table so the water can come off it, which is stupid, I didn't think of that, and then use the table with the slate on it. I did that, and afterwards I got banned from 3D printing for a month. In a few days, I'll be getting my 3D printing rights back, but I'll not be allowed to 3D print at my own house. I'll need another place to 3D print, since doing it at my house is no longer an option. I'm at a point where I can't do anything for myself right now. It is bad enough having autism and being 22 years old and being forced to live with my parents because of it, but if this keeps going on and on, I won't have any hobbies anymore. My parents were joking the other day that if this keeps going on, I can't use anything greater than a 12-volt battery. To make matters worse, the only thing making me want to get out of bed anymore is my hobbies. I don't have a job. I'm going to college extremely part-time, and it's just college and my hobbies right now. I swear this virus thing sucks. Here are my thoughts on what to do about this. My parents need to either let me use the 3D printer so I can learn like what I was doing before about this kind of stuff. If they don't feel comfortable with that, they need to be open to talking, which they're not open to talking at all. Every time I ask them a question, asking why something is dangerous, I get shut down. That is not helping and is making matters worse. This situation would be frustrating even in any normal time, but especially during a pandemic when it's like there's not a lot of other options of what you can do. Many things are locked down or you're trying to practice social distancing, and he was even trying to do the 3D printing as a way of helping others. It sounds like the parents really should be more supportive. Maybe if they had hesitations about it, they should just be asking more questions to learn more for themselves and work together to find a solution so that he can do his hobby in a way that they're happy with. Submit your story to be read on the channel at VoiceyHereStories@gmail.com and join our Voicey veteran community at r/VoiceyHere. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell to never miss an episode. Alright, Voicey veterans, I'll see you in the next one.